afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the SNACC conference for 2023. My name is John King Belisai. I'm the current president of the Council of Scottish Clans and Associations, one of the 6 sponsor members of the SNACC conference. And we're here today to hear from Lord Lyon, Dr. Joseph Morrow, who has a number of very interesting things to say to us this year. As you may know, Lyon's been with us several times before at SNACC conferences. A little bit of background very quickly. He's a member of the bar in Scotland and a QC, Queen Counsel, and a former judge of Scotland's Mental Health Court before he became Lord Lyon. He's also an Episcopal priest, ordained priest, and very familiar with the United States. He's been here many, many times before. In fact, he had a parish out in the Midwest when he was a young priest, and he studied canon law at my alma mater, Georgetown, Washington. He's traveled many times to the States for Tartan Day, for various Highland Games and other events. I first met Lyon in 2015 at the Loch Lomond Games, heard him speak then, and have had the pleasure of working with him many times since then. He's also an honorary member of the St. Andrew's Society of Washington, D.C. I was happy to sponsor him there. So we're going to hear from Lyon today. He's going to talk about a number of things. I know it's been a very busy year for him. As most of you know, Lyon not only handles all matters heraldic in Scotland, but is also involved in organizing and conducting a number of state ceremonials. And Lyon has done that for many, many centuries. And this past year saw a number of those very significant events. So he's going to talk to us mostly about that. And I hope at the end he'll say something about the status of the Lord Lyon Project, which is digitizing all heraldic records in Scotland. And that's underway, and it's a big deal. And I know it's near and dear to his heart. So Lyon, if you could tell us a bit about what's been going on this past year, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you, everybody, for listening to me at your conference. I'm always very pleased to address the conference and feel slightly disadvantaged. I'm not able to be with you to meet you person to person, but please have my greetings, and I hope that the conference goes well, and thank you for all the work that you do. As John explained, one of the functions of the Lord Lyon is to oversee all the state ceremonial, and this year has been a right royal year for the actual state ceremonial. And therefore, I thought you might be interested to actually see what we did since probably I spoke to you last. And it's a different approach from some of the topics that we might have actually talked about in previous years. But of course, it all started with the death of the Queen at Balmoral on the 8th of September. On that day, I had to activate in Scotland all the state ceremonial that actually brought to bear the Queen's movement through Scotland and then down to London, where the state funeral took place. The Queen, I believe, died in a Balmoral castle which was beloved to her, and I don't think that she would have been upset at me saying that I think she was very glad that she passed on there. On the death, the Duke of Rothesay succeeded to the throne as Charles III, and a general message of general mourning was sent out by the Earl Marshal. So that started a historic series of events that I want to share with you. The first was the Accession Council. Here in the Accession Council, we all assemble at St. James's Palace. I was there with the First Minister of Scotland and a number of Scottish figures. And the Privy Council approves the text for the Accession Council. And it was signed by the councillors and sealed with the Great Seal of the Realm. And here's the great and good in St. James's Palace. You can see the Queen, you can see the present Duke of Rothesay, you can see the King. And you've got the President of the Council reading out what should take place. Very formal occasion, and nothing can happen really until the Accession Council. There is a particular Scottish aspect of this, that the King must take an oath to govern the Church of Scotland by the Presbyterian form of government. A very ancient and somewhat quaint idea that the king, before he can take up his actual reign, must give assent to this itself. Because this was part, Article 25 of the Act of Union of 1707, and the oath has been taken by every sovereign since their accession since 1714. By the way of background, there must to be, and as in many countries, a division of power between the church and state. And this is how it's absolutely embedded into the state ceremonial. So the Accession Council goes, the proclamation is signed, and I make my way back to Edinburgh. In old days, I used to come back by a stagecoach or on horse, and that would take 5 days. Of course, with the efficiency of the railway system or the flights, I'm back in Scotland the same day to make the proclamation. So the Accession Council takes place the day after the Queen died. And here on D+2 after the Queen died, I was making the proclamation on the Market Cross in Glasgow. In Edinburgh, the Market Cross in Edinburgh. 2 proclamations, the first at 12 noon, and that's the one you see here. And I have the Honourable Adam Bruce to your left, but to my right, and the Lord Provost of Edinburgh to my left. And I proclaimed the new king. Then we march in due form up to the castle to make the second proclamation. And the second proclamation is to the whole of Scotland or the wider world, proclaiming that we have a new king. And in the background to this photograph, you will see the state trumpeters with their saltires on their trumpets, who work to me in the Lyon office as ceremonial officers. Here's the 3 cheers to the king. We thought we were the best producers of the 3 cheers to the king out of all the national proclamations that were made, and we did it in great gusto, and it was pleasing to actually make the proclamation and to bring in a new reign. Of course, before all of this, as the proclamation was being made, the Queen had to make her way from Balmoral to Edinburgh, and there were crowds all the way down. Beautiful flowers, as you can see. This is the gate of Balmoral, and at the Lord Lieutenancies in Ballater, Aberdeen and Dundee, there were a series of events. But people came and expressed their mourning in their own way to Her Majesty the Queen. Lots of people turned out with their ponies, because her love of ponies, with their corgi dogs to show her love of the corgis. And the farmers of my home county of Angus, they turned out on the road with their polished tractors to pay respects to the Queen as she travelled all the way down from Balmoral to Edinburgh. And it was amazing to see the number of people who wanted to pay respects. The Queen was then brought to the High Kirk of Edinburgh, St Giles Cathedral. Unfortunately, I have to warn you, if you go to St Giles as a tourist and buy the soundtrack, it's my voice. I offered to actually do the soundtrack tour, so you'd have to listen to me again if you ever toured the cathedral. But the cathedral is the national church, as far as we can say we have a national church in Scotland. And there the Queen was brought to lie and rest, and there was a service of thanksgiving conducted by the Dean of the Chapel Royal in Scotland. And before that, the coffin was brought in procession from the Palace of Holyrood House up the hill, of which the King walked behind the coffin all the way into the church. There was also a motion of condolence in the Scottish Parliament, of which the King attended. And this is the view you would have got if you were sitting in one of the pews. Most of the people you'll see with their backs to you, had the ones with chains and robes. They were the provosts or mayors of Scotland. We don't call them mayors, we call them provosts. But it was a very, very special event of which we were able to say a good Scottish farewell to the Queen. Here's the young soldiers who carried Her Majesty out. I think there wasn't one of these young soldiers from the Royal Regiment of Scotland that was over the age of 23. Great responsibility, very proud of the way they did it, and they were absolutely immaculate as they carried the coffin from St Giles for it to go out to Edinburgh Airport to fly to London. One of their mothers, just as a matter of interest, was someone that I knew, and she gave me an absolute telling off on the telephone for not warning her that her son was one of the bearers. But of course, all of that was kept under secrecy, and it really was something that was kept only for those who needed to know. And then here's the Queen by the ceremonial members of the Royal Air Force carrying the coffin into a C-17. Huge, absolutely huge aircraft to take the Queen from Edinburgh down to Bryce Norton and then onwards to London for the ceremonies there. Everything was done in due and great form with lots of ceremonial and lots of military activity. And as you would expect, the pipes were playing at every opportunity, and it was a real Scottish farewell to Our late Majesty. Here we go now down to London. And as soon as I was finished in Edinburgh, I had to load up my officers at arms and get down to London. And here is the formal lying at state at Westminster Hall. You'll see in the background at the bottom of the step all of the officers at arms in attendance there, and they will have their black sashes to mark the actual mourning period. And you can see at the bottom of this slide the royal family just coming in to pay respects. This was something very special, and there was a service conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury as the initial part of the lying at state took place. And many people came to Westminster Hall to see and pass by the Queen's coffin. That had also happened at St Giles. We had several periods of people walking past the coffin in St Giles. So there was a lot of opportunity for those who wanted to actually say their personal farewells to the Queen. This was the start, basically, of the London end of the ceremony. And here is us coming out after the state funeral. The officers at arms, of which I'm somewhere in the middle at the back, beginning to bring the procession out with the coffin, which is to be moved from Westminster Abbey through London and then eventually on to Windsor. Here's the parade with the officers at arms and the commander of the parade. The parade was magnificent. It lasted for hours. I'm told there was 6,000 people took part in the parade, and the absolutely wonderful ceremonial that I believe we do at our best was reflected in London. And here I am marching with the other Kings of Arms, all in step. So I hope you notice that the Kings of Arms, as we marched through London in the procession, and all of us, the three Kings of Arms, we completed 7.5 miles of marching that day to pay our respects to the Queen. Those of you who are interested in this sort of activity, the lady behind is Black Rod from Parliament. So she's the lady behind, and she was very good at keeping us in step. So that's us in the procession. And of course, once we'd got through London, we then had to go to Windsor. And I show this slide because it shows the beautiful floral tributes that came from all over the world to mark the passing of the Queen. This was the most significant bit of the day for me, partly because we were at the end. You'll see I'm in the top left-hand corner as you look, but this was the committal of Her Majesty at St George's Chapel, Windsor. And for those of you who are interested in language and interested in the religious aspects of this, the whole environment changed. It had been one of Her Majesty the Queen, And then after the crown jewels were removed from her coffin before she was committed to the crypt, she was referred to as our sister, Elizabeth, and a daughter of God. And it talked very much about the levelling effect that can take place with regard to when someone passes on. But this was the most moving bit of the ceremony for me. God save the king. We had no longer buried the queen. Then the coronation date was set for the 6th of May in Westminster Abbey. And this is the king's cipher that he had designed in the College of Arms and is used widely with a particular, with the imperial crown in England and with the Scottish crown in Scotland. But before we could go to the coronation, we had to prepare for the coronation in Scotland. The ancient Stone of Destiny, which was removed by Edward I in a very, very contentious way, restored with the amnesty of Elizabeth II, was now to return with the consent of the Scots people to be placed under the throne to complete the ceremony. And here is the stone removing itself from Edinburgh Castle to be taken down to Westminster Abbey. There's our First Minister. You'll see 2 archers and you'll see the officers at arms there taking part in the ceremonial. But without the stone going down to the Abbey and being placed under the throne, such as without the obligation to take the oath for upholding Presbyterian government, then the coronation couldn't have taken place because it links through the union of the 2 crowns. Here am I in Westminster Abbey with the stone ready to be placed under the throne to be ready for the coronation. And on the 6th of May, the ceremony of the coronation was attended by 2,200 people from 203 countries. It is strange to reflect that the historical nature of this stone is so significant that the coronation could not go ahead without it being under the throne. And it's a well worth to read something about the Stone of Destiny, which will tell you a lot about the kind of mystical aspects that go on within Scottish life and culture. Here's the king and queen arriving, and they arrived to the ceremony. The king was presented to the people. He took the coronation oath. He was anointed. He was invested, and then he was enthroned. And I'm sure those of you who were interested in this watched it all on television. It was well covered. But this is the arrival of the king at Westminster Abbey. And here's him leaving. Now, I don't know what you think of, but I could not have got a better photograph anywhere for this. And I was wearing the crown of the Lord Lyon for the first time. So very rarely would I put the crown on, but the coronation is one time. People say I look a bit smug in this photograph. That's not the reason that I'm looking smug. I just stood for 2.5 hours and I was just so relieved that it was out and we're outside and moving on. But you can see that actually the only people who wore crowns were the king and the queen and the kings of arms. And it was a marvelous day, great experience for me. And I was able to share it with some people from Scotland who attended on that day. Now, for those of you with a real Scots interest, that wasn't the end. You would think that the coronation was the end. But there has been a tradition in Scotland of a presentation of the royal honours of Scotland. Now, the royal honours of Scotland are a crown, a sceptre, and a sword. And they're probably the most ancient of royal jewels in Europe. And these are presented to the king as an aspect of the union of the crowns in a ceremony called the Royal Honours of Scotland. We were kind of caught by surprise because the old sword that was given by Pope Julius II in the 12th century was not fit to be used. So we had to commission a sword to be used with the crown and the sceptre, which were the oldest crowned jewels than Europe, if not further than that. So the sword couldn't be used, but the crown and the sceptre were. Here's the sword. Who designed the sword? Well, an American who's now a British citizen designed the sword. The chap on your left is called Mark Dennis. He was formerly one of my officers at arms, and he's the most magnificent painter and designer. And he designed the new Elizabeth sword, which you'll see sitting on this table, presented to the king by myself for the first time. And that took place on the 4th of July. There is supposed to be, and I say this as a good way of getting some insight into this, there is a film that's been made of the making of the sword, and it's held by copy by the Heraldry Society of Scotland. But I think they're quite happy to actually give it out, and it's quite a good evening's entertainment if you're interested in how it took place. For example, the pummel stone was taken from rock in Iona that was over 2 billion years old. So that's a little lead-in for that. The people up Mark's the man with the moustache at your left. The people right up the aisle there were all the makers. And we were so relieved that we managed to get this sword done in such a short time. And off we went to the presentation of the Royal Honours of Scotland that took place on July the 10th, with the honours and the people's procession marching in due form from the castle to St Giles Cathedral. Here's the pipes and drums. I was somewhere tucked up into the crowd there, bringing down the crown of Scotland in Rolls-Royce 1. Now, I could get used to be driven around in Rolls-Royce 1. It was one of these magnificent state cars that was glass all around, and it was just a great experience. I just loved going through the crowds and allowing them to see the crown itself. Here's the presentation of the crown. The top is the crown presented by the Duke of Hamilton, who's the hereditary crown bearer of Scotland. We have the bottom that was presented by the Lord Justice Clerk of the sceptre on the left, and there's the sword being carried in by the Chancellor of Glasgow University. And for those who want to know who the gentleman alongside her, who was one of the escorts, well, he's an old friend of mine. He's called Marcus Humphreys, and he lives up in Dinnet and very involved in the Aboyne Games. But a real Scottish affair. And we had 100 people march in the people's procession to come into the St Giles to make this celebration. So a wonderful Scottish way of presenting the crown jewels of Scotland with a new sword to our new king. And finally, I had to present the Stone of Destiny. Now, I don't think I look very fetching in these white tights, I have to say to you, but that was the court dress that we agreed that I would wear. But if you look at the words, in the presence of the Stone of Destiny or Scone, in the High Kirk of Edinburgh, on this occasion of a historic moment in the life of Scotland, carved from the earth, this is a simple piece of stone, yet in its simplicity, it has precious and significant symbolism for the people of this land. The Stone of Destiny, an ancient symbol of Scottish sovereignty. And that's very important, because for me, all of this state ceremonial works together to reflect both our ancient traditions and our modern life. And we really must, on all occasions, make sure that we actually are able to interpret what we do in the past to the next generation. Lots of young people came into this ceremony and took part in it, and it made such an impact on them. So at the end of this, that almost and did complete our right royal year. And God save the King. Thank you very much for listening. And that was the presentation of the right royal year. You can see how busy everybody was during that year. I was a bit under the weather in terms of actually being able to keep up contacts. But I'm very glad at this opportunity to be able to share some of these with you. I have no objection to you sharing the actual presentation further if you want to use them in your own organizations. The Lyon Court, just to fill in, is actually doing well. We've still got a very strong, steady amount of petitions coming in. And the Lord Lyon Society, although we've been on a bit of a hold with all of this ceremonial, we're starting back to work to actually look at digitizing the registers, and that's halfway on through its process. And we've also recorded all the seals that we have in the Lyon office, and they should go up fairly soon onto the internet for people to see. So everything's well. We send you our best wishes. I look forward to being with you someday. Next year, I don't think I'm going to get to the United States much, but I need to make an effort the following year, because next year I'm going off to Australia, to the Tartan Week in Melbourne. So I'm going to look forward to that. And I give you all my greetings, best wishes, and look forward to meeting you personally. And I'm sorry not to be with you. Thank you very much for listening.